Um, has everyone joined the uh, stream yet? I think we'll start today's session. Hmm. Yeah, I guess Vayalar reading. I guess it'll be me, Nikhil, Zaira, and Rico who are reading. Um, should we each take one of these sections? I was thinking we'd do four and then see if we have time to do more.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, sure.
Right. Yes, then I'll do the introduction. Yeah. If anyone has any like doubts about the what do you call it? The terms and all of that in here, feel free to ask or like put it in the chat or something. Because yeah, we if it needs explaining, we will explain it. Yeah, okay. I guess I'll start now. Um, Introduction to Karl Marx's Wage, Capital, and Labor by Frederick Engels. Um, this pamphlet first appeared in the form of a series of leading articles in the Neue Rheinische Zeitung, beginning on April 4th, 1849. The text is made up of from lectures delivered by Marx before the German Working Men's Club of Brussels in 1847. The series was never completed. The promise to be continued at the end of the editorial in number 269 of the newspaper remained unfulfilled in consequence of the precipitous events of that time. The invasion of Hungary by the Russians. Tsarist troops invaded Hungary in 1949 to keep the Austrian Habsburg dynasty in power, and the uprisings in Dresden, Iserlohn, Elberfeld, and the Palatinate, and in Baden. Spontaneous uprisings in Germany in May to July of 1849 supporting the imperial constitution, which were crushed in mid July, which led to the suppression of the paper on May 19th, 1849. And among the papers left by Marx, no manuscript of any continuation of these articles has been found. Wage, Labor, and Capital has appeared as an independent publication in several editions, the last of which was issued by the Swiss Cooperative Printing Association in Hottingen, Zurich in 1884. Hitherto, the several editions have continued the exact words of the original articles, but since at least 10,000 copies of the present edition are to be circulated as a propaganda tract, the question necessarily forces itself upon me. Would Marx himself, under these circumstances, have approved of an unaltered literal reproduction of the original? Marx, in the 40s, had not yet completed his criticism of political economy. This was not done until towards the end of the 50s. Consequently, such of his writings as were published before the first installment of his critique of political economy was finished deviate in some points from those written after 1849 and contain expressions and whole sentences which, viewed from the standpoint of his later writings, appear inexact and even incorrect. Now, it goes without saying that in ordinary editions intended for the public in general, this earlier standpoint as a part of the intellectual development of the author has its place. That the author, as well as the public, has an indisputable right to an unaltered reprint of these older writings. In such a case, I would not have dreamed of changing a single word in it. But it is otherwise when the edition is destined almost exclusively for the purpose of propaganda. In such a case, Marx himself would unquestionably have brought the old work, dating from 1849, into harmony with his new point of view. And I feel sure that I am acting in his spirit when I insert in this edition the few changes and additions which are necessary in order to attain this object in all essential points. Therefore, I say to the reader at once, this pamphlet is not as Marx wrote it in 1849, but approximately as Marx would have written it in 1891. Moreover, so many copies of the original text are in circulation that these will suffice until I can publish it again unaltered in a complete edition of Marx's works to appear at some future time. My alterations center about one point. According to the original reading, the worker sells his labor for wages, which he receives from the capitalist. According to the present text, he sells his labor power. And for this change, I must render an explanation to the workers, in order that they may understand that we are not quibbling or word juggling, but are dealing here with one of the most important points in the whole range of political economy, to the bourgeoisie, in order that they may convince themselves how greatly the uneducated workers, who can be easily made to grasp the most difficult economic analyses, excel our supercilious cultured folk, for whom such ticklish problems remain insoluble their whole long life. All of this is mostly self explanatory. Do I need to? I mean, is there anything to explain? I don't think so.
No, keep reading.
Keep going, yeah.
Classical political economy borrowed from the industrial practices the current notion of the manufacturer that he buys and pays for the labor of his employees. This conception has been quite serviceable for the business purposes of the manufacturer, his bookkeeping, and price calculation. But naively carried over into political economy, it there produced truly wonderful errors and confusions. Political economy finds it an established fact that the prices of all commodities, among them the price of the commodity which it calls labor, continually changes. That they rise and fall in consequence of the most diverse circumstances, which often have no connection whatsoever with the production of the commodities themselves. So that prices appear to be determined, as a rule, by pure chance. As soon, therefore, as political economy stepped forth as a science, it was one of its first tasks to search for the law that hid itself behind this chance, which apparently determined the prices of commodities and which in reality controlled this very chance. Among the prices of commodities, fluctuating and oscillating, now upwards, now downwards, the fixed central point was searched for. Uh, shit. Uh, okay. For around which these fluctuations and oscillations were taking place. In short, starting from the price of commodities, political economy sought for the value of commodities as the regulating law, by means of which all price fluctuations could be explained, and to which they could all be reduced in the last resort. And so, classical political economy found that the value of a commodity was determined by the labor incorporated in it and a requisite to its production. With this explanation, it was satisfied, and we too may, for the present, stop at this point. But to avoid misconceptions, I will remind the reader that today this explanation has become wholly inadequate. Marx was the first to investigate thoroughly into the value forming quality of labor and to discover that not all labor which is apparently or even really necessary to the production of a commodity imparts under all these circumstances to this commodity a magnitude of value corresponding to the quantity of labor used up. If therefore we say today, in short, with economists like Ricardo, that the value of a commodity is determined by the labor necessary to its production, we always imply the reservations and restrictions made by Marx. Thus, much for our present purpose, further information can be found in Marx's Critique of Political Economy, which appeared in 1859 and the first volume of Capital. Everything here will be like subsequently explained in the text that is coming. So, okay. But as soon as the economists applied this determination of value by labor to the commodity labor, they fell from one contradiction to another. How is it? How is the value of labor determined? By the necessary labor embodied in it. But how much labor is embodied in the labor of a laborer of a day, a week, a month, a year? If labor is the measure of all values, we can express the value of labor only in labor. But we know absolutely nothing about the value of an hour's labor. If all that we know about it is that
What happened to him?
I think he muted himself.
Probably. Let me ping him in.
Had his dad is not.
sorry about that. Yeah, okay. But if labor is the measure of all values, we can express the value of labor only in labor. But we know absolutely nothing about the value of an hour's labor if all that we know about it is that it is equal to 1 hour's labor. So thereby we have not advanced one hair's breadth nearer to our goal. We are constantly turning about in a circle. Should that be explained or like should I continue?
I think you need to explain what the contradiction here is like, as in, um, Engels is writing this, right? The introduction.
Yeah,
I think, yeah, okay. So he's saying that there was a problem among the classical economists. So I think you need to explain that.
yeah, okay. So basically, so as I see it, I think the problem that he's talking about is the fact that, like, as it says here, if the labor, like, we know absolutely nothing about the value of an hour's labor. Like, yeah, they assume that labor is the determining value. Like, sorry, value is determined by labor. Therefore, they did not go into how labor, like how the value of labor is determined. I think that's what
Yeah, kind of like that. It's like the value of a commodity is determined as the in terms of the labor embodied in it, right?
yeah.
Yeah,
But
but then the question is, what is the value of labor,
body, yeah,
right?
it
So
became
because they thought that the worker is giving his labor to the his employer, right? So what is the value of that labor? So they did not know the concept of labor power, which Marx comes into later. So
it became essentially this
labor
scissor
becomes, yeah, it
tautology.
becomes a
Like
contradiction. Yeah,
because they're saying it's similar. It's exactly like you saying labor is equal to labor or like one is equal to one. It doesn't really mean anything except for
yeah.
the fact that it's just saying something. I will continue.
It's like saying 1 meter, it's 1 meter, and then asking like it's like saying a rod is 10 meters, and then asking how many meters is a meter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Um, Classical economics, therefore, essayed another turn. It said the value of a commodity is equal to its cost of production. But what is the cross cost of production of labor? In order to answer this question, the economists are forced to strain logic just a little. Instead of investigating the cost of production of labor itself, which unfortunately cannot be ascertained, they now investigate the cost of production of the laborer, and this latter can be ascertained. This it changes according to time and circumstances, but for a given condition of society, in a given locality, and in a given branch of production, it too is given, at least within quite narrow limits. We live today under the regime of capitalist production, under which a large and steadily growing class of the population can live only on the condition that it works for the owners of the means of production, tools, machines, raw materials, and means of subsistence in return for wages. On the basis of this mode of production, the laborer's cost of production consists of the sum of the means of subsistence or their price in money, which on the average are requisite to enable him to work, to maintain in him the capacity for work, and to replace him at his departure by reason of age, sickness, or death with another laborer. That is to say, to propagate the working class in required numbers. Yeah. Think in this part. Hmm. Yeah, they basically, instead of actually looking into labor, they changed what they were looking at and talked about the laborer and how, which is once again like the idea of labor power, which we will come into later. Yeah, I think I'll continue. I think the example explains it. Let us assume that the money price of these means of subsistence averages 3 shillings a day. Our laborer gets, therefore, a daily wage of 3 shillings from his employer. For this, the capitalist lets him work, say, 12 hours a day. Our capitalist, moreover, calculates somewhat in the following fashion. Let us assume that our laborer has to make a part of a machine which he finishes in one day. The raw material costs 20 shillings. The consumption of coal by the steam engine, the wear and tear of the engine itself, of the turning lathe, and of the other tools with which our laborer works represent for one day and one laborer a value of 1 shilling. The wages for one day are, according to our assumption, 3 shillings. This makes a total of 24 shillings for our piece of a machine. But the capitalist calculates that on average he will receive for it a price of 27 shillings from his customer, or 3 shillings over and above his outlay. Whence do they 3 shillings pocketed by the capitalist come? According to the assertion of classical political economy, commodities are in the long run sold at their values. That is, they are sold at prices which correspond to the necessary quantities of labor contained in them. The average price of our part of a machine, 27 shillings, would therefore equal its value, that is, equal the amount of labor embodied in it. But of these 27 shillings, 21 shillings were values which were already existing before the machinist began to work. 20 shillings were contained in the raw material, 1 shilling in the fuel consumed during the work, and in the machines and tools used in the process and reduced in their efficiency to the value of this amount. There remains 6 shillings which have been added to the value of the raw material. But according to the supposition of our economists themselves, these 6 shillings can arise only from the labor added to the raw materials by the laborer. His 12 hours labor has created, according to this, a new value of 6 shillings. Therefore, the value of his 12 hours of labor is equivalent to 6 shillings. So we have at last discovered what the value of labor is. Should I finish the example and then like explain it, or
I think you need to example how they got all these numbers. Sorry,
yeah,
explain.
yeah, okay. So
Yeah.
here um, I think an important part is where he says that according to the assertion of classical political economy, commodities are in the long run sold at their values. So this is in to account for the fact that we most of the time the normal assumption is that the profit is made by selling commodities above their values, or like basically selling them above their values, and it is from that difference that profit is derived. But like statistically this is not true, and in the long run most of the time the average price of a commodity always ends up being its value. So this this argument will be examined by Marx like in Capital in like more depth, but this is like what Engels is referring to in the situation where it is not sold over its value, the price, which is also its value, is going to be 27 shillings. And this is what they found from like a normal machine being sold. I think, yeah, a normal piece of machine being sold in the market. You know? So, and from these, um, as he's saying here, like from these 27 shillings, 21 shillings were already existed. Like in the raw material, basically the value is transferred from the raw material to the new product. Like the 20 shillings, the 1 shilling in the fuel consumed. And so totally 21 shillings was already there. And like the extra 6 shillings is the value that has been added to the raw material in order to make this commodity. Okay, I think I'll continue and then explain. So basically, the what he's saying here is that like the 12 hours of labor has created 6 shillings. That's the conclusion that he's come to. Okay,
So wait, so the thing is, the product that you make, you have to sell it at a certain price. So they're saying that the price is determined by how much you put into the cost of making it, right? So the cost of making it is what he says is it's 21 shillings, but when you sell it, you're selling it at 27 shillings. So when we ultimately calculate the cost of production, we end up having 6 shillings, and that is becomes the value of the labor put into making that product. Except, um, as we saw earlier, we are giving the laborer only 3 shillings. We're going to get to that. I'm actually skipping a little bit. But yeah, so basically, there's an amount that we can finally pin down to and say that now this is the value of labor. Go on.
um, hold on there, cries our machinist. 6 shillings, but I have received only 3 shillings. My capitalist swears high and day that the value of my 12 hours labor is no more than 3 shillings. And if I were to demand 6, he'd laugh at me. What kind of a story is that? If before this we got our value of labor in a vicious circle, we now surely we now surely have driven straight into an insoluble contradiction. We searched for the value of labor and we found more than we can use. For the laborer, the value of 12 hours of labor is 3 shillings. For the capitalist, it is 6 shillings, of which he pays the working man 3 shillings as wage and pockets the remaining 3 shillings himself. According to this, labor has not one but two values, and moreover, two very different values. As soon as we reduce the value now expressed in money to labor time, the contradiction becomes even more absurd. By the 12 hours labor, a new value of 6 shillings is created. Therefore, in 6 hours, the new value created equals 3 shillings, the amount which the laborer receives for 12 hours of labor. For 12 hours of labor, the working man receives as an equivalent the product of 6 hours of labor. We are thus forced to one of two conclusions. Either labor has two values, one of which is twice as large as the other, or 12 equals 6. In both cases, we get pure absurdities. Turn and twist as we may, we will not get out of this contradiction as long as we speak of buying and the selling of labor and of the value of labor. And just so it happens to the political economists, the last offshoot of classical political economy, the Ricardian school, was largely wrecked on the insolubility of this contradiction. Classical political economy had run itself into a blind alley. The man who discovered the way out of this blind alley was Karl Marx. Okay, so I forgot to say if anyone has any questions about anything in here, please just put it in the chat. Um, so here, oh, okay, wait, like, does anyone else want to speak on this? I don't want to
I
steamroll.
think we already talked about this. It's basically what we said, in that we are giving the laborer who makes the product 3 shillings. We, as in, let's just take the capitalist is
Capitalist.
giving the laborer 3 shillings. But when we got to the calculation, we saw that the value of his labor was actually 6 shillings. So, what's happening here is there is a contradiction in that when the value is not how much the laborer receives in wages. So what does this mean in with regards to time that he has worked? So his work day is 12 hours, so he's working 12 hours to make a product, and ultimately he gets 3 shillings, but what he should be getting is 6. So what does that mean? It means that he can work less amount of time, that is from 12 he can work to 6 hours, and he can get the same amount of money, which means that it doesn't matter whether he works a shorter amount of time or longer amount of time, he's being paid the same. So this is a contradiction, and the ultimately all these years of political economy ended up here, where people couldn't quite explain what the value of labor signifies, or what it determines. So that's where we have stopped.
Yeah,
Go on.
yeah. What the economists had considered as the cost of production of labor was really the cost of production, not of labor, but of the living laborer himself. And what this laborer sold to the capitalist was not his labor. So soon as his labor really begins, says Marx, it ceases to belong to him and therefore can no longer be sold by him. At the most, he could sell his future labor, that is, assume the obligation of executing a certain piece of work in a certain time, but in this way he does not sell labor, which would first have to be performed, but not for a stipulated payment. He places his labor power at the disposal of the capitalist for a certain time, in case of time wages, or for the performance of a certain task, in case of piece wages. He hires out or sells his labor power, but this labor power has grown up with his person and is inseparable from it. Its cost of production, therefore, coincides with his own cost of production. What the economists call the cost of production of labor is really the cost of production of the laborer, and therewith his labor power. And thus, we can also go back from the cost of production of labor power to the value of labor power and determine the quantity of social labor that is required for the production of a labor power of a given quantity, as Marx has done in the chapter on the buying and selling of labor power. So here, I'm saying, anyone other than the admins want to have a go with this, or like should we take it?
Someone can try to like,
Yeah, yeah. It's like
explain
basic
it, because
stuff. Yeah, you can. It doesn't
yeah,
matter if you like make mistakes. Like fine, anyone wants to.
I don't think so.
Okay, then I will continue.
I mean, they can just read. They don't even have to explain.
Yeah, it's very direct, and don't get worried because the sentences seem to be long and stuff. It's just like basic things. You have to like think about it with terms to your own life. Like when he says production, just think about a normal item being produced. Like if it's a bit intimidating in that sense.
You like don't want to talk. You can like put whatever you understand in the voice chat if possible. I will continue. I will like explain this part, I guess. So here, what Engels is basically saying is that you cannot sell labor that does not exist. Uh, so, like the only thing that, like because the worker gets paid before, or like the worker contract to work. He has not done the work and he's not selling it to the capitalist. He's going to work for the capitalist. Therefore, he's selling like his ability to work, which is here he calls it labor power. And then he goes on to say that like the labor power is a part of the person who's working, and therefore the cost of his production coincides with his own cost of production, which is like the same as the amount of money that is required for you to have a
Live.
live exactly, like food, a roof over your head, all of those things, or even in terms of it depends, right? Like unskilled and skilled labor, like when the amount of money that is required for you to get educated. All of that is included in this value of labor power. I hope I hope everyone understood the difference between labor and labor power. If you did not, please put it in the chat. Possible?
If you don't, it'll get clearer soon. So
Yeah,
don't be
yeah.
worried.
I'll get throughout the pamphlet. Okay, I'll continue now. Now, what takes place after the worker has sold his labor power, that is, after he has placed his labor power at the disposal of the capitalist for stipulated wages, whether time wages or piece wages, the capitalist takes the laborer into his workshop or factory where all the articles required for the work can be found: raw materials, auxiliary materials, coal, dye stuff, etc., tools, and machines. Here, the worker begins to work. His daily wages are as above 3 shillings, and it makes no difference whether he earns them as day wages or piece wages. We again assume that in 12 hours, the worker adds by his labor a new value of 6 shillings to the value of the raw materials consumed, in which the in which new value the capitalist realizes by the sale of the finished piece of work. Out of this new value, he pays the worker his 3 shillings, and the remaining 3 shillings he keeps for himself. If now the laborer creates in 12 hours a value of 6 shillings, in 6 hours he creates a value of 3 shillings. Consequently, after working 6 hours for the capitalist, the laborer has returned to him the equivalent of the 3 shillings received as wages. After 6 hours' work, both are quits, neither one owing a penny to the other. So yeah, basically, I think this is pretty self-explanatory. Should I? Basically, what it's saying is that it's the yeah. Okay. Hold on there. Now cries the capitalist. I have hired the laborer for a whole day for 12 hours, but 6 hours are only half a day. So work along lively there until the other 6 hours are at an end. Only then will we be even. And in fact, the laborer has to submit to the conditions of the contract upon which he entered of his own free will, and according to which he bound himself to work 12 hours for a product of labor which cost only 6 hours' labor. Similarly, with piece wages, let us suppose that in 12 hours, our worker makes 12 commodities. Each of these costs a shilling in raw material and wear and tear, and is sold for 2.5 shillings. On our former assumption, the capitalist gives the laborer 0.25 of a shilling for each piece, which makes a total of 3 shillings for 12 pieces. To earn this, the worker requires 12 hours. The capitalist receives 30 shillings for the 12 pieces, deducting 24 shillings from the raw materials and wear and tear. There remains 6 shillings, of which he pays 3 shillings in wages and pockets the remaining 3. Just as before, here also, the worker labors himself for 6 hours, that is, to replace his wages, half an hour in each of the 12 hours, and 6 hours for the capitalist. Um, okay, I'll just finish the next paragraph as well. The rock upon which the best economists were stranded, as long as they started out from the value of labor, vanishes as soon as we make our starting point the value of labor power. Labor power is, into our present day capitalist society, commodity like every other commodity, but yet a very peculiar commodity. It has, namely, the peculiarity of being a value creating force, the source of value, and moreover, when properly treated, the source of more value than it possesses itself. In the present state of production, human labor power not only produces in a day a greater value than that it itself possesses and costs, but with each new scientific discovery, with each new technical invention, there also arises surplus of its daily production over its daily cost. While as a consequence, there diminishes that part of the working day in which the laborer produces the equivalent of his day's wages, and on the other hand, lengthens the part of his work of the working day in which he must present labor gratis to the capital. I think. Okay.
You'll have to
Yeah.
explain that.
Yeah. Wait. Before this, like, it's basically the two paragraphs before this is talking about like the two kinds of wages that laborers received in that time wages and piece wages, and how there is not really a big difference between them in terms of how the laborer only actually receives
The
in
same
this
amount.
case, yeah, the same amount of
Money.
wages. Yeah. Okay. So here, yeah. So what here is trying to say is that when we look at labor power is a very special kind of commodity. No, wait. Yeah. Yeah. And the fact that it can create value, which is not seen in any other commodity. The only like humans can only humans can create value. And as the society has progressed with the increase in productivity, it takes lesser and lesser time to create more value. But the amount of money required for the like sustenance or required for a person to keep living does not change in the same in the same manner. Therefore, the what's the word? The value of of this person's labor power pretty much stays stable. Thereby, like they spend less and less time creating money for themselves and spend more and more time creating value, technically for free for the capitalist. I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
Okay, I will continue unless anyone has a question.
Can you just repeat that? Like, there was a sort of disturbance in my listening, so I didn't hear that.
Oh yeah, basically, okay, yeah, basically, like as society progresses and like the production capabilities increase, the it becomes easier and easier for the same product to be created in less and less time. Thereby, the amount of time, like this might sound a bit confusing right now. It will be cleared as we go through the pamphlet, but like basically, as time goes on and as like uh, advances happen, the amount of time that a person has to work to create his own wages or like the value for the money he gets is becomes lesser, and the amount of time he's working for free for the capitalist increases. Yeah, I hope that's clear.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And this is the economic constitution of our entire modern society. The working class alone produces all values. For value is only another expression for labor. That expression, namely, by which is designated in our capitalist society of today, the amount of socially necessary labor embodied in a particular commodity. But these values produced by the workers do not belong to the workers. They belong to the owners of the raw materials, machines, tools, and money, which enable them to buy the labor power of the working class. Hence, the working class gets back only a part of the entire mass of products produced by it. As we have just seen, the other portion which the capitalist class retains and which it has to share at most only with the landlord class is increasing with every new discovery and invention, while the share which falls to the working class rises but little and very slowly or not at all, and under certain conditions, it may even fall. Um, I think the socially necessary labor part should be explained. Is someone wanna take that?
So basically, they're saying that um, as time goes on, wait, let me just read it once. For value is only another expression for labor, that expression mainly by which is designated in our capitalist society of today the amount of socially necessary labor embodied in a particular commodity. So basically, they're saying that as time goes by, we have more technology. It becomes easier to make things. So the amount of time that is necessary to create commodities that are necessary for society, it actually should be lesser, but it is not, because this time is going to be used up by the laborer to produce more value that's going to go directly to the capitalist. So he is not going to take any of that extra value that he's producing in that extra time, because first of all, he doesn't own the means of production. So the things that he uses to make things, like he's producing an item, but he doesn't own the raw materials, the machines or the tools that go into making it. That is owned by the capitalist. So ultimately, he's working for the capitalist because he owns all the means of production to create all these things. So he will work as under this capitalist, and he will receive a particular amount of money, but not how much he is supposed to get, because he's working for a long period of time. The remaining period of time, he earns his wages in like a particular amount of time. Whatever is left of the day, all of that value, all of that money, it goes straight up to the capitalist, and he doesn't have to share it with anybody because he owns the means of production. So he does not owe that money to anyone else except him. Here in this case they're talking about the landlord. So if he's like on someone else's land, he may have to give a little bit to the landlord, but even then that's not a lot that he's sacrificing. Whereas with the case of the worker works longer and longer, he makes more and more things, and as people are increasing, he's making even more items. If it's like, piece wages, then with each piece that he makes, he's, working longer, except he's not receiving the the necessary value that he should be receiving for how much he's working. So yeah, I hope
I
that's
just
clear.
want to talk about socially necessary labor for a minute here. Because that's a bit like basically socially necessary labor is like the average amount of time uh, that it takes for a commodity to be created. Or should I go into that, or just leave it there?
Yeah, continue, say.
Yeah. So basically, it's the amount of time and like intensity, average time and intensity that it takes to create a commodity. So like it might take me 2 hours to create the same thing that someone else creates in like half an hour, and like the average of the time everyone takes to create something becomes the socially necessary amount of labor. I just wanted to point that out in case anyone had a confusion about what that is. I'll continue now. But these discoveries and inventions, which supplant one another with ever increasing speed, this productiveness of human labor, which increases from day to day to unheard of proportions, at last gives rise to a conflict in which present capitalist economy must go to ruin. On the one hand, immeasurable wealth and a superfluidity of products with which the buyers cannot cope. On the other hand, the great mass of society, proletarianized, transformed into wage laborers, and thereby disabled from appropriating to themselves that superfluidity of products. The splitting up of society into a small class of immoderately rich and a large class of wage laborers devoid of all property brings it about that the society smothers in its own superfluidity, while the great majority of its members are scarcely or not at all protected from extreme want. This condition becomes every day more absurd and more unnecessary. It must be gotten rid of. It can be gotten rid of. A new social order is possible in which the class differences of today will have disappeared, and in which, perhaps, after a short transition period, which, though somewhat deficient in other aspects, will in any case be useful morally. There will be the means of life, of the enjoyment of life, and of the development and activity of all bodily and mental faculties through the systematic use and further development of the enormous productive powers of society which exists with us even now, with equal obligation upon all to work, and that the workers are growing ever more determined to achieve this new social order will be proven on both sides of the ocean on this dawning May Day and on Sunday, May 3rd. Okay. Ooh. All right. I think this part is pretty self-explanatory. It's just, I think it's easier to see this now than before with the kind of incredible differences in money that exists in our society. Yeah. I don't think I need to explain that. I'm assuming I don't need to explain. I think we'll do the next section, which who's gonna read that?
Does he say anything important here?
Hmm? I don't
In
think
this,
so, actually.
I think we can skip it because
It's basically this part is basically talking about what they're going to talk about here. So
right.
yeah, do we need to? Yeah, it's just talking about like the French Revolution and how it betrayed the workers, and it's. I think we'll skip this. I
I
think.
think they can just read it if they want later and then
Yeah.
ask doubts. Yeah.
Yeah, just some history. So I think we'll go to what are wages. Who's reading this?
Can I read this? I don't want to
Yeah.
read the next one. Okay. Okay. What are wages? How are they determined? If several workmen were to be asked, how much wages do you get? One would reply, I get 2 shillings a day, and so on. According to the different branches of industry in which they are employed, they would mention different sums of money that they receive from their respective employers for the completion of a certain task. For example, for weaving a yard of linen or for setting a page of type. Despite the variety of their statements, they would all agree upon one point, that wages are the amount of money which the capitalist pays for a certain period of work or for a certain amount of work. Okay. Consequently, it appears that the capitalist buys their labor with money, and that for money. Oh, 1 second. Okay, never mind. Um, 1 second. Consequently, it appears that the capitalist buys their labor with money, and that for money they sell him their labor. But this is merely an illusion. What they actually sell to the capitalist for money is their labor power. This labor power the capitalist buys for a day, a week, a month, etc. And after he has bought it, he uses it up for letting the worker. 1 second. Brother's knocking on the door. Sorry about that. Um, what was I reading? Uh, this labor power the capitalist buys for a day, a week, a month, etc. And after he has bought it, he uses it up by letting the worker labor during the stipulated time. With the same amount of money with which the capitalist has bought their labor power, for example with 2 shillings, he could have bought a certain amount of sugar or of any other commodity. The 2 shillings with which he bought 20 pounds of sugar is the price of the 20 pounds of sugar. The 2 shillings with which he bought 12 hours' use of labor power is the price of 12 hours' labor. Labor power then is a commodity no more, no less than is the sugar. The first is measured by the clock, the other by the scales. Okay, so here he's he's basically going to start dissecting what wages are. So if you ask someone who's a worker, like what are your wages or how much do you get, they're going to say a particular amount no matter what different kind of industry they're from. And it's established that it is the amount of money you're going to get for performing certain amount of work or for a certain period of time. But Marx is actually making a distinction between labor and labor power, in that when the capitalist employs a person to work, he is employing that person for their labor power, for their capacity to do labor. It's not that labor's value is fixed in any way, in that you work for this amount of time, this is the amount of labor you're going to do. No, he can actually make you work longer or more under a certain amount of time. So it's actually a person's capacity to do work for the capitalist. So in that sense, it doesn't matter how long he works. He can work for a day, a week, or a month. It's it it depends on how much he can work or how much he is required to work under their particular employer. And he calls labor power a commodity because essentially the capitalist is buying your capacity to work. All you can do is work for him. That is why you are useful to him. So what he's buying, what he's giving you as wages is actually, the money he's paying to use your labor power. In that sense, it is your labor power is no different from any other commodity. You go out and you buy any item for any amount of money, it is exactly the same as buying a person's labor power. So yeah, that's what he's saying here. Their commod oh wait if Does anyone have any questions? I think here it's pretty simple, but if you have
I
any
think it's
questions, you can put.
going on and explaining
Mhm.
what was kind of touched upon in the intro.
Yeah, yeah. This is, yeah, it's basically what we've been talking about for so long. But if you have questions, just put in the chat. Yeah. Their commodity, labor power, the workers exchange for the commodity of the capitalist, for money. And moreover, this exchange takes place at a certain ratio. So much money for so long a use of labor power. For 12 hours weaving, 2 shillings. And these 2 shillings, do they not represent all the other commodities which I can buy for 2 shillings? Therefore, actually, the worker has exchanged his commodity, labor power, for commodities of all kinds and, moreover, at a certain ratio. By giving him 2 shillings, the capitalist has given him so much meat, so much clothing, so much wood, light, etc., in exchange for his day's work. The 2 shillings, therefore, express the relation in which labor power is exchanged for other commodities, the exchange value of labor power. So, yeah, so here he's saying that when the when the laborer, the worker, receives their wages, what it represents for them is that with that amount of money, he can buy how much ever commodity that amount of money is equal to. That is, if he gets 2 shillings, for 2 shillings, everything that he can buy is what is expressed in those 2 shillings. So he is exchanging his labor power, his ability to work, for the commodity of the capitalist. So, what the capitalist has is money. That's what he's receiving in return. So, there is an exchange value. There is an exchange going on, and that exchange in itself has a value, and that value is how much money you get or how many commodities you can buy with the money that you have just received. And this exchange is taking place at a certain ratio. In that, if you work a particular amount of time, you get that much of money. So if you work less amount of time, he's not going to pay you, more. He's going to pay you less. So there is a certain ratio present with which this exchange is taking place. Um, the exchange value of a commodity estimated in the exchange value of a commodity estimated in money is called its price. Wages, therefore, are only a special name for the price of labor power and are actually called the price of labor. It is a special name for the price of this peculiar commodity which has no other repository than human flesh and blood. So, this is what we just said. If we understand the wages that the laborer receives as how much he's receiving for his commodity, which is labor power. In that, the capitalist is buying the commodity of the laborer. So it's actually a price that the capitalist is putting on your ability to work. So how much you can work, he is going to give a particular value to it. That is the price of your labor power, and that is the amount of wage that you get. And yeah, that's it.
Think
Um,
wait, I think this is like you can use this to this is an example of like what we read last week about of how Marx uses multiple different
Correct. Yeah.
uh,
So if people were here last week, they would remember that Marx uses many different terms to mean the same thing. So earlier he was talking about here he's talking about price, and earlier he's talking about how a commodity has a particular value. So that value is the same as the price you receive for your labor power, and the commodity of the laborer is their
labor
labor
power.
power. So he's using many different words, and they all mean essentially one thing. So if it's confusing because he's using many words, it's actually not. You can just dumb it down to a person who works for a different person, the amount of money he gets. That's it. So yeah, I'm going to move on.
Yeah,
Let us take any worker, for example, a weaver. The capitalist supplies him with the loom and yarn. The weaver applies himself to work, and the yarn is turned into cloth. The capitalist takes possession of the cloth and sells it for 20 shillings, for example. Now, are the wages of the weaver a share of the cloth of the 20 shillings of the product of the work? By no means. Long before the cloth is sold, perhaps long before it was fully woven, the weaver has received his wages. The capitalist then does not pay his wages out of the money which he will obtain from the cloth, but out of money already on hand. Just as little as loom and yarn are the product of the weaver to whom they are supplied by the employer, just so little are the commodities which he receives in exchange for his commodity, labor power, his product. It is possible that the employer found no purchasers at all for the cloth. It is possible that he did not get even the amount of wages by its sale. It is possible that he sells it very profitably in proportion to the weaver's wages, but all that does not concern the weaver. With a part of his existing wealth, of his capital, the capitalist pays the labor power of the weaver in exactly the same manner as with another part of the wealth he has bought the raw materials, the yarn, the instrument of labor, the loom. After he has made these purchases, and among them belongs the labor power necessary to the production of the cloth, he produces only with raw materials and instruments of labor belonging to him. For our good weaver, too, is one of the instruments of labor, and being in this respect on a par with the loom, he has no more share in the product or in the price of the product than the loom itself has. Okay, so here he's taking the example of a weaver, and to the weaver, the capitalist, the person who employs him, is going to give him the necessary tools to make cloth. So he's going to make the cloth, and then the capitalist is going to take it and sell it for a certain amount of money. But none of this concerns the person actually at work to make it, because even before this has been sold, even before receiving the profit, the laborer has already been paid. His wage is fixed. It's not changing according to how much is being sold, or all of those things. All of that is immaterial to the person at work, because what he's receiving is, you know his what do you call it, price for his commodity, the labor power. And in exchange, wait, yeah, um, so even if the capitalist ultimately ends up in loss, it does not really matter, because he's paying the laborer from the money he already has at hand. So he already has capital with him. So he's taking that capital and paying the worker, and he's providing him all the tools necessary to make the item at hand. So the worker at hand has no say in what happens after he has done the work. His only job is to appear and work, and after which he is going to be paid. So what happens to the things, the tools he has used, or what happens to the product he has made, it does not concern him. It is, he has no say there. He's almost, here Marx uses the term, he is just an instrument of labor, in that he is exactly like the machinery that he uses, because he has no say in the matter. All he's there to do is work, and after that he is of no use. All right, okay, let's go on. Wages, therefore, are not a share of the worker in the commodities produced by himself. Wages are that part of already existing commodities with which the capitalist buys a certain amount of productive labor. Um, Consequently, labor power is a commodity which its possessor, the wage worker, sells to the capitalist. Why does he sell it? In order to live. So, I think we already explained it. Is there something
Yeah,
here
yeah.
that needs to be explained? I don't think so. So, if anyone has any questions, they can ask it. It can be about the words used here, whatever.
Even if it's
Okay.
after the fact, or even if we're like past the point, like if we
Yeah,
have
if
something, we can ask.
yeah. Somebody from the reading circle pointed it out to me that people are afraid to ask questions because they are afraid of looking stupid. That's okay. I don't know what to say, but uh, if that is the concern, then don't be concerned. It's gonna be fine. You're gonna
Yeah,
have to learn about it anyway, so might as well ask it now than not know it ever. So okay, I will move on.
okay.
Um, but the putting of labor power into action, that is, the work, is the active expression of the laborer's own life. And this life activity he sells to another person in order to secure the necessary means of life. His life activity, therefore, is but a means of securing his own existence. He works that he may keep himself alive. He does not count the labor itself as part of his life, it is rather a sacrifice of his life. It is a commodity that he has auctioned off to another. The product of his activity, therefore, is not the aim of his activity. What he produces for himself is not the silk that he weaves, not the gold that he draws up the mining shaft, not the place that he builds. What he produces for himself is wages. The silk, the gold, the palace are resolved for him into a certain quantity of necessaries of life, perhaps into a cotton jacket, into copper coins, and into a basement dwelling. And the laborer for who 12 hours long weaves, spins, bores, turns, builds, shovels, breaks, stone, carries hoards, and so on, is this 12 hours weaving, spinning, all that stuff, regarded by him as a manifestation of life as life. Quite the contrary. Life for him begins where this activity ceases, at the table, at the tavern, in bed. The 12 hours work, on the other hand, has no meaning for him as weaving, spinning, boring, and so on, but only as earnings, which enable him to sit down at a table, to take his seat in the tavern, and to lie down in bed. If the silkworm's object in spinning were to prolong its existence as caterpillar, it would be a perfect example of a wage worker. So, when the laborer is working, he's essentially, you know, using his entire, he's taking up his life, his time out of his day to work. He's using his body, his energy, and everything that he has in order to work. But even though he's putting this much of himself into the work that he's doing, the for him the work doesn't mean anything except that he's going to receive money in the end. That is the aim of his activity. That is what he makes. Ultimately he creates a product, right? So that product does not belong to him. He has no say in that product, and that product is not even something that he works for. It's not going to be given back to him, right? Like he weaves cloth, but the cloth doesn't go to him, it goes to whoever buys the cloth. So for him, his aim in working for the capitalist is to receive some amount of money. And while he's working, he does not consider that time that he works as, some productive work that he's doing, as in it's taking out like a large amount of his life. But that doesn't mean anything to him, because life only makes sense to him after he finishes working. When he's done working and he can sit down somewhere, he can, I don't know, whatever he does after his job is what for him actually makes his life have any meaning. So essentially he is sacrificing a certain amount of his life in order to work so that he can sustain himself. So he is working so that he is able to live, so that he has enough money to carry on with his life and do whatever he actually finds meaning in. So he is auctioning himself off. He is giving himself as a commodity to someone else so that he can be given a certain amount of money, and later he can, resume his life after he's done working. That's what it says here. Scroll.
Oh shit, sorry.
Okay. Labor power was not always a commodity, merchandise. Labor power was not always wage labor, that is, free labor. The slave did not sell his labor power to the slave owner any more than the ox sells his labor to the farmer. The slave, together with his labor power, was sold to his owner once and for all. He is a commodity that can pass from the hand of one owner to that of another. He himself is a commodity, but his labor power is not his commodity. The serf sells only a portion of his labor power. It is not he who receives wages from the owner of the land, it is rather the owner of the land who receives a tribute from him. The serf belongs to the soil, and to the lord of the soil he brings its fruit. The free laborer, on the other hand, sells his very self, and that by fractions. He auctions off 8, 10, 12, 15 hours of his life, one day like the next, to the highest bidder, to the owner of raw materials, tools, and the means of life, that is, to the capitalist. The laborer belongs neither to the owner nor to the soil, but 8, 10, 12, 15 hours of his daily life belongs to whomsoever buys them. The worker leaves the capitalist to whom he has sold himself as often as he chooses, and the capitalist discharges him as often as he sees fit. As soon as he no longer gets any use or not the required use out of him. But the worker, whose only source of income is the sale of his labor power, cannot leave the whole class of buyers, that is, the capitalist class, unless he gives up his own existence. He does not belong to this or that capitalist, but to the capitalist class, and it is for him to find his man, that is, to find a buyer in this capitalist class. So here, Marx is making a very important distinction between uh, slavery or feudalism or whatever it is that preceded the existence of capitalism. So the difference is essentially in that with regards to a slave, the slave himself is the one who is going to be sold, and he is going to, like, his labor power is not the thing that he is selling, so he himself becomes somebody else's commodity. So his labor power is accompanied with that, that's a different thing, but the fact that he can work is not essentially why he's being sold. He is a slave because he is a person that can be sold. But when it comes to the wage worker, he as a person can feel as a free person. Pasha, he is his commodity is his labor power. What people are buying is the fact that he can do work. So you're important to the capitalist because you can perform a particular kind of labor that he wants. So the moment you stop being able to do that work, then you are no longer necessary for the capitalist. So you are the thing which is at sale here is not you as a person, but your ability to do work. And you cannot leave you can leave one capitalist and perhaps go to the next, depending on how much the next person offers. So if the next capitalist gives you more money than the one that you're working for now, you'll very well leave your job and go to him and work with him. So essentially, you may not belong to one particular company or a person or a industry. You belong to the entire class of capitalists because they are capable of buying your labor. So yeah, that's what it said here. Before entering more closely upon the relation of capital to wage labor, we shall present briefly the most general condition which comes into consideration in determination of wages. Wages, as we have seen, are the price of a certain commodity, labor power. Wages, therefore, are determined by the same laws that determine the price of every other commodity. The question then is, how is the price of a commodity determined? So yeah, so the conclusion is that the because we understand labor power now, we have figured out that labor power is a particular commodity and wages is the price that you pay to receive that labor power. So just like every other commodity whose prices changes, we have to figure out what determines wages, as in we have understood what wages are, but now we have to figure out how somebody determines how much wages you get. So that's going to be in the next chapter. So if anyone has any questions, you can ask it now about wages.
Before we move on, yeah.
Okay.
Who's, um, who's gonna read this part? Rico or Nikhil, whoever.
Yeah, I'll read it.
Okay.
Okay. By what is the price of a commodity determined? By the competition between buyers and sellers, by the relation of the demand to supply or of the call to the offer. The competition by which the price of a commodity is determined is threefold. The same commodity is offered for sale by various sellers. Whoever sells commodities for the same quality most cheaply is sure to drive the other sellers from the field and to secure the greatest market for himself. The sellers therefore fight among themselves for the sales market. Each one of them wishes to sell and to sell as much as possible, and if possible, to sell alone, to the exclusion of all other sellers. Each one sells cheaper than the other. Thus, there takes place a competition among the sellers which forces down the price of the commodities offered by them. But there is also a competition among the buyers. This, upon its side, causes the price of the proffered commodities to rise. Finally, there is a competition between the buyers and the sellers. These wish to purchase as cheaply as possible, those to sell as dearly as possible. The result of this competition between buyers and sellers will depend upon the relations between the two above mentioned camps of competitors. That is, upon whether the competition in the army of sellers is stronger. Industry leads two great armies into field against each other, and each of these again is engaged in a battle among its own troops in its own ranks. The army among whose troops there is less fighting carries off the victory over the opposing host.
Yeah.
Um,
Do you have anything to say about that, or should we explain it?
yeah, I mean, yeah, you explained it.
Why
Okay.
don't you try?
Yeah, it's this the
Because you just
first
read
part
it, so
seems
you
very like
want to
yeah.
do it sometime.
Yeah. Um,
Go by line if you are feeling, you know, not confident about the whole concept.
okay. By competition between buyers and sellers, by relation of the demand to supply of the call to offer. What's of the call to offer? I'm not sure of what that is, but yeah.
I think it means, I think it's sort of means demand itself.
Okay.
Yeah, demand
Okay.
and supply. Okay,
Okay.
go to the next one. Yeah.
The same commodity is offered for sale by various sellers. Whoever sells commodities of the same quality most cheaply is sure to drive the other sellers from the field and to secure the greatest market for himself. The sellers therefore fight among themselves for the sales for the market. Each one of them wishes to sell and to sell as much as possible, and if possible, to sell alone to the exclusion of all other sellers. Each one sells cheaper than the other. Thus, there takes place a competition among the sellers, which forces down the price of the commodities offered by them. Okay, that's understandable. Like, yeah, each seller wants to sell lesser and stuff. Yeah, I understood that. That's pretty
Each seller wants to
self-explanatory.
sell more.
Yeah.
Yeah, for lesser price.
Yeah, so that they can sell
Yeah.
more.
Yeah,
As in
they
the
lower the
competition between, yeah, the competition between the sellers ultimately will result in the price of the commodity being reduced. So if many people are selling one commodity, as in you can actually take examples from your life. You know, if there's a particular commodity that's very hot right now, you will see the price lowering because there are
Yeah.
way too many sellers, right? So they're all
Mm.
competing with each other, and it becomes important for them to sell because they've put money into this product that they've spent so much to make it. So now it has to sell. So now they'll begin to reduce it so that more people will buy it. So
Yeah.
that is one kind of competition. Next.
Yeah. Okay. But there is also a competition among the buyers. This, upon its side, causes the price of the profit commodities to rise. Okay. There's a competition among the buyers. Um,
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, like you'll offer
basically.
more to pay more, or one other person will offer to pay more, more than what you offered, like that.
oh, okay. Cool. So,
Basically demand, right? Like
Yeah,
more
Yeah,
when
yeah,
yeah,
there are
it's
more
demand.
people to buy something, and like depending on how many things are there, like you would be willing to pay more to, I guess like the vaccine is a really good example. Like there are people who are
mm,
willing
So
to
yeah,
pay
exactly.
a lot
yeah,
of money to get the vaccine, and now there isn't enough of vaccines to go around. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh yes.
Okay.
Okay. You can.
Finally, there is competition between the buyers and the sellers. These wish to purchase as cheaply as possible, those to sell as dearly as possible. The result of this competition between buyers and sellers will depend upon the relations between the two above mentioned camp competitors. That is, upon whether the competition in the army of sellers is stronger. Okay. Um,
So I think we forgot to mention that when the competition between the buyers is taking place, what happens is they'll cause the price of the commodity to rise because there are more people who want to buy something. So which means that the people who are selling can actually increase the price because
Mhm.
there are more people who are willing to buy it. Okay,
Mm. Mm.
so yeah, go on.
I didn't wait. Okay,
What's
those
wrong? What's
Yeah,
wrong?
what is it?
these wish to purchase as cheaply as possible, those to sell as dearly as possible. What does that mean?
They're talking about buyers and sellers. So buyers wish to uh, buy as cheaply as possible. You wouldn't want to pay like a large amount of money for something, right? You want something for
Mm.
cheap, and the sellers obviously don't want that. They want to sell so much that they will give you the price that you want. So
Mhm.
there is a competition between buyers and sellers itself, and that
Like,
depends upon
yeah, the
the
competition
the
of
two
like,
Yeah.
competition.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. It is upon whether the competition in the army of sellers is stronger. Okay. Cool. Industry leads two great armies into the field against each other, and each of these is again engaged in a battle among its own troops, own ranks. The army among whose troops there is less fighting carries off the victory over the opposing host. Yeah, okay. So basically, if suppose there are more sellers and uh, they would want to increase the price of the commodity, uh, and like vice versa, kind of. Is that
yeah,
right?
like less competition is meant to say that like if there are less buyers, there will obviously be less competition, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
that's the thing. Like, and the buyers will won't really have to pay like a huge amount of money because there'll probably be enough product to go around. And like the same way the other way around, if there's like less product to go around, the buyers will end up having to pay huge prices, and thereby uh, what do you call it? The sellers make
Price will go
end
up.
up winning.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
So you have to remember this relationship. The one,
this is yeah,
yeah, the competition between the sellers will cause the price to go down, whereas the competition between the buyers will cause it to go up
go on.
because this will become important later on. And don't get confused.
Yeah.
Hope that's clear for everyone. Okay. If anyone does have a question, okay, okay, all right. Yeah, we'll just
Okay.
yeah
Uh,
continue.
Let us suppose that there are 100 bales of cotton in the market, and at the same time purchases 100,000 bales of cotton. In this case, the demand is 10 times greater than the supply. Competition among the buyers then will be very strong. Each of them tries to get hold of one bale, if possible, of the whole 100 bales. This example is no arbitrary supposition. In the history of commerce, we have experienced periods of scarcity of cotton, where when some capitalists united together and sought to buy up not 100 bales, but the whole cotton supply of the world. In the given case, then, one buyer seeks to drive the others from the field by offering a relatively higher price for the bales of cotton. The cotton sellers, who perceive the troops of the enemy in the most violent contention among themselves, and, and who therefore are fully assured of the sale of their whole 100 bales, will beware of pulling one another's hair in order to force down the price of cotton at the very moment in which their opponents race with one another to screw it up high. So all of a sudden, peace reigns in the army of sellers. They stand opposed to the buyers like one man, their arms in specific contentment, and their claims would find uh, no limit did not the offers of even the most
In
importunate of buyers have a very definite limit. Okay, this actually is kind of like what's happening with the vaccine right now. But
yeah,
anyway,
this is
uh,
you could say this is the example of what they said of like a competition between buyers and sellers, right?
yeah, yeah. Like in this case, the sellers have like the high ground or whatever. Like
Yeah, and there is
Yeah.
no competition among the sellers, and that's why they are winning because their products are being sold
Yeah.
at very high costs.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. If then the supply of the commodity is less than the demand for it, competition among the sellers is very slight, or there may be none at all among them. In the same proportion in which the competition decreases, the competition among the buyers increases. Result, a more or less considerable rise in the price of the commodities. It is well known that the opposite case, with the opposite results, happens more frequently. Great excess of supply over demand, desperate competition among the sellers, and a lack of buyers force sales of commodities at ridiculously low prices. But what is a rise and what a fall of prices? What is a high and what is a low price? A grain of sand is high when examined through a microscope. A tower is low when compared with a mountain. And if the price is determined by the relation of supply and demand, by what is the relation of supply and demand determined? Okay, yeah, he's just explaining the previous thing, and yeah, that's fine, I guess, right?
I think he's trying to put into perspective the question that we have to ask here, because because as they mentioned, like generally there is like this thing that happens, which is supply and demand. But
Mhm.
since like we don't know what, it's kind of arbitrary. It's just something that happens, and but we don't know exactly what it means. So
Mhm.
that's what we are going to go into next, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let us turn to the first worthy citizen we meet. He will not hesitate one moment, but like Alexander the Great, will cut his metaphysical knot with his multiplication table. He will say to us, if the production of the commodities which I sell has cost me £100, and out of the sale of these goods I make £110 within the year, you understand, that's an honest, sound, reasonable profit. But if in exchange I receive 120 or 130 pounds, that's a higher profit. And if I should get as much as 200 pounds, that would be an extraordinary and an enormous profit. What is it then that serves the citizen as the standard of his profit? The cost of the production of his commodities. If in exchange for these goods he receives a quantity of other goods whose production has cost less, he has lost. If he receives in exchange for his goods a quantity of other goods whose production has cost more, he has gained. And he reckons the falling or rising of the profit according to the degree at which the exchange value of his goods stands, whether above or below his zero, the cost of production. Okay, so in this case, he's saying like the cost of production is basically, his starting point. Like when he gets more, when he gets more than the cost of production, then it's like a profit, and when he receives less, it's a loss. That's basically what is there here, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Next, we have seen how the changing relation of supply and demand causes now a rise, now a fall of prices, now high, now low prices. If the price of a commodity rises considerably owing to a failing supply or a disproportionately growing demand, then the price of some other commodity must have fallen in proportion. For of course, the price of commodity only expresses in money the proportion in which other commodities will be given in exchange for it. If, for example, the price of a yard of silk rises from 2 to 3 shillings, the price of silver has fallen in relation to the silk, and in the same way, the price of all other commodities whose prices have remained stationary have fallen in relation to the price of silk. A large quantity of them must be given in exchange in order to obtain the same amount of silk. Now, what will be the consequence of a rise in the price of a particular commodity? A mass of capital will be thrown into the prosperous branch of industry, and this immigration of capital into the provinces of the favored industry will continue until it yields no more than the customary profits, or rather until the price of its products, owing to overproduction, sinks below the cost of production. Okay, I kind of have to read again because
Sure, go ahead.
okay. You see how the changing condition of supply and demand causes now a rise, now fall of prices, now high, now low price. the price of a commodity rise considerably owing to a failing supply or a disproportionately growing demand, and the price of some other commodity must have fallen in proportion. But of course, the price of a commodity only expresses in the money the proportion in which the commodities will be given in exchange for it. Okay. If, for example, the price of a yard of silk rises from 2 to 3 shillings, the price of silver. Why are they comparing two different commodities? In this case,
Because like no, because that's what he's talking about. He's saying that if these are all different industries, and it makes it a little confusing, but just take for example, a commodity is rising in price. So he's saying that in the market of goods, where everything is being sold, another commodity is going to experience a change. I mean, not the commodity, the price of the commodity is going to experience a change because this one has rised up in price and the other will probably go down. That's what he's saying.
okay, cool.
Yeah, as
Okay,
in they're all related. Yeah, correct. So this person in the chat is saying the rise and falls of commodities, they're all interlinked. So it doesn't matter if it's the same commodity. In the market, all the different commodities, all their prices are
like
interlinked because it's
like
the economy,
yeah,
together.
yeah,
basically I think what the thing is, right, like if someone needs to buy silk, they if assuming this person produces or like gets sells silver, right, he
yeah,
needs to sell more silver to buy the same amount of silk. Thereby, like the value of his silver is decreased because he has to sell more of it, to get this
mm,
silk.
Yeah.
yeah,
And that's what happens. And that's how he's trying to explain, because like this is how the market works. You
mm,
sell something you have, and then you buy something you need. And I think that's what
For
he's
more,
talking about.
yeah,
Yeah, based on the price.
Yeah. And
mm,
there, towards the end, I think he's talking about how,
No,
like, even if
l- let her read the list, no?
yeah, sure, son.
uh, what?
Yeah,
Just a
I'll finish
second.
that.
So sorry, but yeah. What I kind of related this to is like how people end up comparing like gold and like the onion when the that whole crisis happened.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Anyway, now what will the consequence of a rise in the price of a particular commodity? A massive capital will be thrown into the prosperous branch of industry, and this immigration of capital into the provinces of the favored industry will continue until it yields no more than the customary profits, or rather until the price of its products, owing to overproduction, sinks below the cost of production. Okay, so basically, it's like, uh,
What happened
yeah,
earlier? As in,
meaning,
you produce more because earlier we were talking about how
yeah,
overproduction happens, right? So basically,
yeah,
something is favorable now. He's understood that the price has gone up, the capitalist, and that means he can put more capital into that particular industry, expecting more returns. Except it'll only give a certain amount of profit. After that, it's not gonna go, skyrocket into like something
mm,
he can't even like comprehend
yeah,
because that's how the
Like
market works. So you're
it's
yeah,
producing
also
so much that people can't consume it. People are not buying it because you've
yeah,
overproduced. So what
mm,
happens when you produce more? You know, it'll sink. The price will sink below the
yeah,
cost of
yeah,
production. Yeah.
yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
like when something becomes like when you see that something has like really high price, a lot of people start like coming into the like a lot of new people think like, oh, I can make profit here, and they start like producing the same things, and thereby like a lot more of yeah overproduction happens, and like this in turn reduces the cost and like balances it out.
Yeah, cool. Just so I can, yeah, okay. Yeah. Conversely, if the price of a commodity falls below its cost of production, then capital will be withdrawn from the production of this commodity, except in the case of a branch of industry which has become obsolete and is therefore doomed to disappear. The production of such a commodity, that is, its supply, will, owing to this flight of capital, continue to decrease until it corresponds to the demand, and the price of the commodity rises again to the level of its cost of production, or rather, until the supply has fallen below the demand and its price has risen above its cost of production. For the current price of a commodity is always either above or below its cost of production. Okay. Okay, cool. Yeah, if suppose the like this is basically like the fall, like what happens after the like the above example. Like basically they say that this overproduction will cause like a sinkage, like the price of it will decrease. That's
Yeah.
basically what
Right.
they're
Yeah, so what
explaining
happens
here.
when the price decreases is that the capitalist will stop putting money into it. Right.
Yeah.
So, and even in the case where, there's a branch, so he's giving the example of perhaps there's an industry that's obsolete. It's, people are hoping for it to disappear soon. Even in that case, the same thing happens. So,
Mm,
the ultimate point is that it keeps balancing each other out. When prices increase, it increases above or below the cost of production, and it will keep balancing each other out no matter in what way these things are
mm, mm,
happening.
okay. Okay, next. We see how capital continually emigrates out of the province of one industry and immigrates into that of another. The high price produces an excessive immigration, and the low price an excessive emigration. We could show from another point of view how not only the supply but also the demand is determined by the cost of production. But this would lead us too far away from our subject. Okay. Uh, how not only but also demand. Okay. We have seen how the fluctuation of supply and demand always brings the price of commodity back to its cost of production. The actual price of a commodity indeed stands above or below the cost of production, but the rise and fall reciprocally balance each other so that within a certain period of time, if the ebbs and flows of the industry are reckoned up together, the commodities will be exchanged for one another in accordance with their cost of production. Their price is thus determined by their cost of production. Okay. Yeah, this like I think the last the sentence explains that paragraph. Like the price of each product is determined by their cost of production more than anything.
Yeah, yeah. Basically, what that I think like that last paragraph is saying is what this whole example has been about, right? Like
Mm,
it says like if when it increases,
mm,
it brings it back down, and then it keeps fluctuating, but like on average, the price is like it's sold at the cost of its production at its like actual value.
mhm. Okay.
Yeah. If does anyone have any questions or should we continue? Okay, I think we'll continue.
Okay. The determination of price by the cost of production is not to be understood in the sense of the bourgeois economists. The economists say that the average price of commodities equal the cost of production. That is the law. The anarchic movement in which the rise is compensated for by a fall and the fall by a rise they regard as an accident. We might just as well consider the fluctuations as law and the determination of the price by cost of production as an accident, as is in fact done by certain other economists. But it is precisely these fluctuations which viewed more closely carry the most frightful devastation in their train, and, like an earthquake, cause bourgeois society to shake to its very foundations. It is precisely these fluctuations that force the price to confirm the cost of production. In the totality of this disorderly movement is to be found its order. In the total course of this industrial anarchy, in this circular moment, competition balances, as it were, one extravagance by the other. Cost production is not to be understood. Now we say that the average price of a commodity is equal to cost production. that is the law. The anarchic movement in which the rise is compensated for fall and fall by. So the anarchic movement in which the rise is compensated for by a fall and the fall by a rise they regard as an accident. Why is that an accident? Isn't that just balancing?
So, what they're saying is that like bourgeois economists think that just happens. That's just like something that ends up happening the way the price regulates itself.
Mhm. Consider the fluctuations as a law and the determination of the price by cost of production as an accident, which is in fact done by certain other economists. But it is precisely these fluctuations which, viewed more closely, carry the most frightful devastation in their train. Uh, okay, so it's this fall and rise of the price that causes bourgeois society to shake its very foundations.
Because they can't,
Yeah,
they he's saying that you cannot technically determine something's price, because for
yeah,
the economists they're saying that the law is the price of a commodity is determined by the cost of production. But we're seeing it now. When you like really look into it, we see that that's not true technically, even though that is true, except what it determines is that there is a rise and fall of price based upon the how much you produce something. And this whole thing where this balancing act is happening, you can't quite predict how this is going to happen. The price is fluctuating constantly, so there is no you know you can't pin it down to anything. Therefore this economics is essentially supposed to like give you the answer. It's supposed to make selling and buying easier, except they every 10 years this will keep happening to the point where the market will collapse, where something is
yeah,
produced so much or so little that it can't be accounted for. So that is why
yeah.
that he's saying that it will shake the foundations, it will make it hard
Like,
to, yeah, say.
yeah, it's like the way the shake to its very foundations is like he's referring to like financial crises and like the Great Depression and stuff where nothing is sold at all. Like no one has like money, doesn't like people don't even have the money to buy anything. That's what
Mm,
Yeah,
that's what
so
ends up happening.
here we're talking about making something, right? Giving it a price,
Mm.
making it, selling it. Except there is the other side of it where people don't have money to
Buying,
buy
yes,
it, or they just don't want to buy it, or whatever. So actually with the case of history, what happens is, he's not mentioning it here, I'm just saying it for clarity. Every 10 years there's an economic crisis, or every, I don't know, 15 years, whatever. Like basically on a periodic scale the economy will crumble, it will break down, and people will try to find reasons for it, and they'll try to be like, oh, it's this thing, it's that thing, and they'll associate it to something that has happened very particularly, except this has been happening for years. So he
200
is
years, yeah.
get yeah, it's been happening for so many years now. As long as capitalism has been around, every some amount of years, periodically the economy will crash. And so this crisis, he's pinning it down to this anarchy in fall and rise of price. That is, you can't really predict how price is going to go. Many things can influence it, and therefore ultimately it is so unpredictable, it will cause the failure of the market, right?
mm,
Okay.
yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah, next. We thus see that the price of a commodity is indeed determined by its cost of production, but in such a manner that the periods in which the price of these commodities rises above the cost of production are balanced by periods in which it sinks below the cost of production, and vice versa. Of course, this does not hold good for a single given product of an industry, but only for that branch of the industry. So also it does not hold good for an individual manufacturer, but only for the whole class of manufacturers. The determination of price by cost of production is tantamount to the determination of price by the labor time requisite for the production of a commodity. For the cost of production consists first of raw materials and wear and tear of tools, etc. That is, of industrial products whose production has cost a certain number of work days, which therefore represent a certain amount of labor time, and secondly, a direct labor, which is also measured by its duration. Uh, okay. Why why is it only for the branch of the industry and not the single given product?
I think here he's trying to say that like these, even though this fluctuation causes the change in prices, it's not that is not what determines the cost of production. It's like and instead it like affects the whole industry or like a whole like if taking the case of the vaccines again, like it's
Mhm.
like affecting the whole industry of vaccines as a whole, not
Mhm.
just one
Okay. Yeah.
thing. And like it's because he's going against like this the bourgeois economist assumption that this fluctuation is what determines the cost of production by but this is not the case. They're like completely turning it around. I think that's explained in the next paragraph.
Okay. The determination of price by cost production is tantamount to the determination of price by the labor time requisite. Uh, okay, what's tantamount? I'm so sorry.
I think it means the same as
Okay.
Conditional,
you.
as in, like,
Yeah,
the determination of
wait, let me go
price by
Google.
cost of production is dependent on this particular thing.
Oh, okay.
Tantamount
Okay.
means dependent, I think.
It's virtually the same as
Mm-hmm.
Huh, okay.
To the determination of price by the labor time requisite to the production of a commodity. But the cost of production consists first of raw materials and wear and tear, etc., of industrial products whose production has cost a certain number of work days. Okay, so he's kind of uh, like equating cost of production, like determination of the price by cost of production to the determination of price by the labor power, like what people have done also.
Mm, so the cost of production is basically how much you spend to make something. So labor power comes under that, right?
So yeah.
Yeah. So make that connection.
Mhm. Time requisite. Okay, cool. Fine. That's it, right?
yeah, that's it. Like, should we continue and do one more section, or like should we stop for today? What do
How
the
big is the
people
next session?
think? Somewhere around the same size.
Oof.
Yeah, I think that'll take a while. Wait, it seems. Oh wait, this is kind of small. So
Uh,
we like, how do we
does
just
Nikhil want to read?
react to the message? We'll take it or leave it. Like Kevin? Or we'll just conclude and we should. One yes. Yeah, I guess yeah. It's been like nearly 2 hours. It's been an hour and 45 minutes, I think. So I think we'll conclude for today. The Yeah, it's been around. We started at like 6:10. Is yeah okay. I think. Um, Nikhil, do you mind like giving a conclusion or something? What we talk about maybe? Mm.
With what wages are, and we saw that wages are based.
Okay, we can't hear you.
Am I audible?
Yeah, now you are.
Okay.
Are you saying something?
Hear me?
Now, like you can't see if you're saying like, yeah, we heard. Can you hear me? But the
Oh
other,
my God. Okay.
shit.
Is he talking?
Are you talking? We can't hear you. Have you been talking throughout, and like we just haven't been hearing you? Uh, oh shit. Um, yeah, we cannot hear
He's
you.
typing.
Okay.
Okay, if anybody else wants to, what do you say?
Yes.
Yeah, conclude it. They can conclude. My mic is not working properly, he's saying.
Yeah. Does anyone else want to conclude?
Just like, ba- basic points of what we said. All right, you do it.
I think, yeah. So I think it was initially the introduction was about what basically
Labor
setting
power
the,
instead of labor.
yeah, differentiating labor power and labor. And then like the first section was about what now at this point, like what are wages,
What are wages?
because
It's
wages
the price of
represent,
the commodity. The
that is called
commodity
labor
is
power.
labor power. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And we developed that
That's
idea.
it.
Then we, yeah, what do we, yeah. And
The
like then
next one
we,
is what determines price.
which was basically demand and supply.
It
I
was
mean,
the
no, it
cost
was
of
demand. It
production.
is demand and supply. And
It
how?
was the cost of production.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's yeah. The price of commodity is determined by the cost of production, and it also touched upon demand and supply, which is a result of the
Yeah.
market and not, which is
That
we call
does.
it like
Yeah. Yeah.
doesn't really affect things. Okay. Yeah. Yes.
That's it.
That's it for this week. Next week we will be going back to the other book we did last week, Alienation by Bertel Ollman. We will try and do as much of the second chapter as we can. It's a bit longer than the first. So yeah, if you can read it, to try and read it. The recording for this one will go up in like 1 or 2 days. And yeah, that's it. Thank you everyone for coming. Yeah.
All right.
Have a nice day. Have a nice week. Yeah. Bye.
Bye.
Okay.